Greetings, my scattered brothers and sisters in the Lord. Trust you know the Lord is with you wherever you find yourself scattered today, and that you know that His presence with you is more than enough for whatever you might face today. We are beginning a new series today. We're going to start working our way through the Gospel of Mark. And today we're really only going to deal with the opening line. We'll move a little bit faster than that most of the time. But the opening line is this: the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And I want to unpack that just a little bit. First, it's the beginning of the gospel. And we might think, okay, why not just call it the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, instead of the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God? But I think it's because Mark sees the gospel movement as something that is still growing, something that is still continuing. And so I'll come back to that word beginning in a moment, but he doesn't see it as complete, sees it as beginning. Now, the gospel is news. It's the good news. So the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And so important to remember that the gospel is first and foremost news. Good news for sure. Sometimes we can reduce the gospel down to teachings, to a particular maybe lifestyle that Jesus would call us to live into. We can reduce the gospel down to kind of a set of morals that we're supposed to live by, but that's all a reduction. The first and foremost thing is that the gospel is news, and it's news that is good, and it's so good that it should completely reshape our lives. The good news that Jesus is the Christ, or the beginning of the gospel, the beginning of the good news, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. We got to pay attention to the titles here: Christ, Son of God. The Christ, or some translations, the Messiah, this is the promised Son of David that God has anointed to establish God's rule, to establish God's authority, to bring God's kingdom. Same thing with Son of God language. I know that when we hear Son of God, we tend to automatically flip it, God the Son. And we're thinking the second person of the Trinity, that Jesus is fully divine. And that's all true, but Son of God was especially kind of a title of the Messiah, that there was a promise made to David that your son will be as a son to me and I will be as a father to him. And so Son of God was language that was used of the Messiah, the anointed one, the King. So all of this is pointing to this good news that in Jesus, God establishes his kingdom, that Jesus operates as the authority of God. And so I don't know how to get at it better. It's kind of like in Jesus, the rule of God is actually going to get done on the earth. And we might kind of stop and think, okay, God rules up in heaven. But how does God's rule actually get done on the face of the earth over people, over God's people, over all peoples? How does that happen? It happens through the Messiah. It happens through the Son of God. It happens through this anointed one who will bring God's rule to earth. And Mark is saying, that's Jesus. We're saying in agreement, yes, that's Jesus. He's the anointed one. He's the Messiah. He's the King. He's the one that brings God's rule down to earth. And that is good news. That instead of being under this ruler or that country, that empire, that institution, that corporation, no, finally, God's rule comes to earth. And it's the beginning of this good news, because God's rule isn't fully established everywhere. And so whether we think about it in terms of, our country, whether we think about it in terms of an international level, we see all kinds of places where God's rule is not yet firmly, totally, fully established. And so it's the beginning of the gospel that this rule is being worked out across history, across humanity, and hopefully in our lives, in our own lives, that we come to a place where we live completely, fully, totally under the authority of God, that there's no pockets of rebellion, no pockets of resistance. The good news of Jesus' rule, of God's rule. And so as we begin to get started, we'll be seeing, Mark's heavy emphasis on the authority of Jesus and how it really is good news. It sets us free to live in the peace of God, sets us free to live completely towards God. And so, Gospel of Mark, the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the one who brings God's rule, God's authority to earth. And it's just beginning. Hopefully it's being worked out and established in your life and my life each day more and more. Well, God bless. Have a great day. Looking forward to journeying with you through the Gospel of Mark.